So it's back to the serial killer genre with Alex Cross. I'm Aaron. Jeremy's here as well. Let's talk about it. Before we get into it, some feedback from last week. The big question last week, favorite true story movies. And we said, what, Apollo 13? And you said...
If you can.
Yeah, Catch Me If You Can, good choice. Jessica on Facebook says she also likes Apollo 13, but also Schindler's List, which neither of us mentioned. That's a great choice.
Yeah, that came into my head, and it is a great choice, and I can't say a bad word about it.
Yeah, that definitely should be up there. Well, let's talk about Alex Cross if we absolutely have to.
Yes, we do.
Based on a James Patterson novel, which I think is the same character that Morgan Freeman played in the Along Came a Spider and those movies.
That's what I understand. Yeah.
So this must be like a novel series, maybe kind of like the Clear and Present Danger kind of thing with Jack Ryan, and now Tyler Perry is playing this Alex Cross detective, and he's on the hunt for Matthew Fox's serial killer, and that's basically the movie. There's not much else to it. A serial killer and the guy who's tracking him down. What did you think, Jeremy?
I thought it was a pretty good episode of Criminal Minds that you paid $8 for. That's about the best I can do to sum it up in one sentence.
Wow. If I had to shrink it down and put it on television, I still don't think it's worth it. It's not even. I don't even think that's a good episode of TV.
Yeah, you might be right. It has higher production values than most television programs.
Well, that's true. There are some explosions, right?
Yeah, some explosions.
Yeah. So there is that. I thought this was awful, man.
Yeah, it's terrible.
I laughed out loud probably 2 or 3 times in the movie, and not because it was supposed to be funny. There are moments in this movie that I'm like, how does that even slip through?
Yeah.
And in a movie that's like, this is supposed to be the big release this weekend, right?
Yeah.
How did Hollywood let that happen? Tell me that.
get-
How does Hollywood let this movie become the big release on a weekend? This weekend was just right for somebody to come in and just blow it away.
I know. Well, they had Paranormal Activity 4, which we chose not to see, and maybe that will win the weekend and blow everybody away. But yeah, it's a terrible movie. It's a terrible. I mean, Rob Cohen's the director. It doesn't surprise me after watching the film to learn that. I have not liked any of his movies. He made Stealth. He made the original Fast and Furious, which is probably his best film. He made Triple X. They're all just kind of bad copies of what better directors do. And that's what I thought this was, a really bad serial killer detective movie.
And I think his movies, as you mentioned those, that makes total sense because it's like they all exist on characters that seem very paper thin, and they exist on what are supposed to be these big moments, but none of them ring true because the character, you're not in it with the characters. And so I felt that way during this entire movie. Like, I know I'm supposed to feel, like, I don't want to give away any major plot points necessarily, but there are deaths that happen in this movie, let's just say. And I know it's supposed to really wreck me, and it just didn't. I didn't know enough about this person. The person wasn't likable enough. I had a hard time connecting throughout this entire thing.
We have to talk about Tyler Perry. That's what everyone's going to talk about, because I think it's pretty clear this is the movie where he's trying to at least grow beyond his Medea, cross-dressing comedian persona that we know him from. He was in Star Trek in a little bit, a bit role. I'm going to choke in the middle of our review.
Well, Tyler Perry will do that to you.
But anyway, so, I honestly don't even think he's necessarily a bad, serious actor. I just think he's terrible as a lead, and he's terrible in this film because, to him, I think the detective just needs to be serious. And he's so not funny that apparently that equals good acting. And I really felt like that was, the movie could have used a little bit more humor, and he's just not a magnetic lead, at least in this role. But it's not as though I felt like he was a terrible, terrible actor.
But the movie tries to have it both ways too. It tries to have him be this really tough and guy that's just gonna go get it, and then at the same time he has several scenes where he's just bawling his eyes out and Mr. Sensitive, and I just it's I don't know, and none of it is played in a way that's felt genuine to me either. I actually preferred his friend Ed Burns, who, imagine that, I preferred Ed Burns as an actor to Tyler Perry.
I said to myself, Ed Burns is slumming. This guy's been in cop movies with De Niro.
Right.
And now is, holding Tyler Perry's hand into the world of serious movies.
Exactly.
He was fine. He was Ed Burns. He wasn't, great or terrible, but...
Well, okay, here's a question for you. Who was great? Was there an actor, was there anybody, bit part or anything in this movie that you thought, oh, finally, somebody's, actually acting?
Well, there are flaws with, I think, all the performances. You've got the police chief, who's the guy from Scrubs, who I think wastes every opportunity they give him to have a big police chief moment. I thought he was sleepwalking. Matthew Fox, I really, really, really wanted to like his serial killer. I really did, but I did not.
No.
He was 110% over the top from the first minute. I was bothered by the movie's identity. I feel like this is probably 2 or 3 movies that some studio put together pieces of, because it doesn't feel like a serial killer movie for the first 20 minutes and the last 20 minutes. It feels like it for parts of it in the middle, but it feels like an episode of Numbers. It feels like a crime procedural. Like this is just a standard cop movie, and then all of a sudden it's a serial killer, and it takes them like literally 5 minutes from one crime scene to figure out where the next one. It's not about solving the crime or getting into the mind of the serial killer. It's a chase movie.
Yeah, in that I'm so glad you brought up the word identity, because I felt the same thing. I was trying to grasp for some way to hang on to what this movie was. What I was supposed to get from this movie. And right from the beginning, I think you're supposed to believe this Alex Cross guy is the most observant person you've ever met. We've seen this scene in movies before where they notice everything that happens around them. They have this superhuman ability to maintain knowledge, all that kind of stuff. And so I'm thinking, okay, this is the character. He's going to be able to use this, throughout the movie. And then he doesn't. Then it never comes up.
In one crime scene, they figure out where to go next, run into the bad guy, and then the rest of the movie is all chase.
That's exactly right. And it felt like it didn't know what it was, and I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. The other thing, we'll go ahead and do best thing, worst thing. I'll start with my worst thing, and there are plenty to choose from. But I went ahead and went with the writing. The dialogue in this movie, there's nothing interesting. Nobody ever says anything interesting in this movie, ever.
No, like the 2 cops in the first scene, where they're cops because they were chasing a guy. They say a snarky remark, and then Alex Cross goes, "You 2 are like 6th graders." And I was like, yeah, that's who wrote this script, is 6th graders. Because there's nothing original or clever, or, you know what I mean? I agree with you completely. The writing is terrible.
Oh, absolutely.
My worst thing, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, because I am the great defender of Paul Greengrass and The Bourne Identity, and, he didn't direct that one, the Bourne films that he did direct. The shaky cam in the fist fight in the climax.
Yeah.
That's the worst I've ever seen. That was bad. Even when they cut away to an angle 30 feet away, the cameraman, for some inexplicable reason, is still doing this. It's broad strokes. Like, we're not even allowed to get one single still setup shot. I almost got up, because I knew the movie was bad. I hadn't enjoyed it. I knew it was coming to a close. But it was bothering me a lot, because that's how you cover up that you didn't do any choreography work.
Yeah. A good thing you didn't leave. You would have missed the big reveal at the end.
Yeah, the big reveal where they remember the plot thread they dropped in the first 5 minutes. Because I actually was sitting there going, "Wait, who hired this guy? What's going on?"
Yeah.
So yeah, I was glad they came back to the big finale where don't they basically just break the law and like morally? Don't they do everything that?
Yeah. Okay. So here's another point. And before you go away from the shaky cam stuff, I wonder if that was because Tyler Perry wasn't a convincing fighter with Matthew Fox. I don't know. I'm just wondering.
I mean, they're shaking the camera to give the viewer the feel of tight quarters and confusion. Right. And I feel like that's what the Bourne movies do very well. You don't always know what's going on, but you can see movements. In this, even when they're punching, the camera's moving. It's 5 minutes of blurry cuts.
Yeah.
And you may be right. Maybe he wasn't up for the choreography.
I don't know. But I'm another point you're dead on is there is no moral backbone in this movie. There's nobody where you go, oh, you're the guy who's going to stand up for what's right. And I've seen movies like that can pull it off a little better. Where it's all bad guys, but there's at least the plotting is interesting and the dialogue is interesting, and you know where you're going. But in this one, if they had at least had a character where you wanted them to succeed, maybe that gives you something to hang on to.
Well, and I will say this. They did have one character who they tried to make the moral center, who gives a lecture to Alex Cross toward the beginning of the climax, and then she completely changes her stance by the end when he's done the very thing she said don't do, and she welcomes him home. The phone crumbled. It was like, what's going on? Like, I didn't get it. I think it's just really sloppy writing.
All right, let's do best thing. So here's my best thing. Best thing about the movie Alex Cross for me, the setting, Detroit. I thought they did a great job of picking out some really beautiful locations for this movie. Specifically, that last fight scene you mentioned takes place in an old theater in Detroit and is really, really gorgeous. You know, sometimes they say like the location or the city is like one of the actors in the movie. I think the city in this movie was the best actor in the film. That makes any sense.
I mean, I don't even know where to come up with the best thing. I really don't. Like, I did not like one single thing about this movie.
Yeah.
I will say that the settings were unique. The parking garage, that was an old theater. I guess that's a real thing. And for all I know, it's in the book that they based this movie on, so I can't give them credit for that. It had interesting sets. I'll just piggyback on yours because I honestly, I'm gonna be lying if I say I liked anything about this.
Plus, I'm a Michigan boy, and the Tigers are in the World Series, and so you know, any shout out to Detroit, I'm gonna give it a plug. So
I'm okay with Detroit trying to get a better image.
So we'll go on to the big question for today from this movie, and then we'll get to our when to see. But the big question is favorite serial killer movie of all time. Favorite serial killer movie of all time. Jeremy, if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and start.
Go.
This one is actually a fairly recent one and just absolutely blew me away. It's Zodiac. I was not expecting to like this movie. In general, I'm not a big fan of serial killer movies. They're a little bit, the evil in them is a little bit too intense for me sometimes, and I just have a hard time shaking the ick off of me, you know, after I see one. And not that the evil in this one isn't intense, it's extremely intense, and it's very dark and hard to watch in some parts, but it is so expertly made that you are so compelled by the story and wanting to know what happens. I love Zodiac. It's an amazing movie.
Well, there have been three movies that are serial killer movies that I love that are all based on the same character, the same series of books. The Silence of the Lambs, I think, is the gold standard of serial killer movies. If it's on and I'm flipping through, I can't not watch it. It's great, and it creeps me out every time I see it. But I also I like Manhunter in the 80s, which fewer people have seen, and I didn't see it until more recent years. I certainly didn't see it in the 80s when I was 7. But it's fantastic. It's a lot longer. And then Red Dragon, which had Ray Fiennes in it, and
is that a Hannibal Lecter movie too?
Yeah. It's Ed Norton's in that. Brett Ratner actually directed that.
No way.
I don't like Brett Ratner at all, but I thought there was so much in that movie that I really dug that it's got a soft spot for me. I can't say it's anywhere near the other two in quality overall, but I kind of defend it because everybody hates it.
Interesting. Neither one of us mentioned Harry Connick Jr. and Copycat.
Oh, well, that's because I forgot all about it. And I did see that movie in theaters.
You saw it in the theater?
Oh, yeah. Well, how could you not? Harry Connick Jr. is a serial killer. I mean, that was the peak
Only
of
thing
his...
I remember about Harry Connick Jr. is his Independence Day role. He goes out to the plains, he's like, lighting tires and kicking fires or whatever. It's probably the opposite of that.
He was good in that movie, but he was not good in the other one.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so we would love to hear your favorite serial killer movie of all time. If you have one, make sure and leave it in the comments here, or you can, look us up on Facebook or tweet it or whatever you want to do. So this is the question. Is this movie bad enough? We think it's bad. Is it bad enough to tell people to never, ever, ever see it? We usually say what? Either see it immediately, see it soon, see it on DVD, see it if it's on TV and you're flipping through, or don't you ever dare see it, it's awful. Which do you say?
I gotta give this one the never, man. I mean, I said the nevers were going to be rare. I didn't say they were going to be non-existent. And this movie has nothing redeeming for me to recommend to anyone.
Completely agree. If this movie doesn't get a never, no movie will ever get a never. This is an awful, awful film. Please do not see it. It is not worth your time. If it's on TV, just turn the channel. It is absolutely a never. And so. Look at this. We go from an immediately to a never with Argo to Alex Cross. Do you think there will ever be a time we go week to week from such a great movie to such an awful movie, back to back?
We may have the reverse of that this coming week.
That's true, because this coming week we're going to see Cloud Atlas. So make sure you stick around for that. We'll be back next weekend with our review of Cloud Atlas. And make sure, again, you leave your comment and let us know what your favorite serial killer movie is, and we'll check it out then.
I can't believe I forgot to talk about the freaking Cadillacs. How
Talk
much did
about it.
Cadillac pay to sponsor this movie? Like, not just make sure that the serial killer's car was a Cadillac, but that we got 5 full seconds of grill front and center every time we saw it. That when he goes to the dealership to talk to Giancarlo Esposito from Breaking Bad, he happens to own a Cadillac dealership. Classic Cadillacs and neon Cadillacs all over the world. And then when they open the door and they're sitting there talking, you can see the reflection of Cadillac. I was so over the top, and I know it's set in Detroit, and I'm pretty sure like Big Auto paid for this movie to be made, but they made several mistakes, starting with hiring Rob Cohen.
Oh, and one more. I have to mention this one more. Okay, so the big final moment of this movie, like the big reveal has just happened, and they are video conferencing with this, there's a video camera so they can see the guy. He's in a different place that they're, want to let, so it's this big reveal at the very end. They finish it up with that big moment, and the Skype noise plays. Like,
Yes.
the Skype call ends. I'm like, really? First of all, they're doing that on Skype, and second of all, you're going to put a little blink right at the end of like a big like dialogue scene. Oh my goodness. It was as bad as the Wilhelm scream that was in this movie 2 or 3 times. I mean, it was just like, you're just trying to make me laugh at this point. You're trying to be funny, right?